Good morning. I'm Dorothy Boulware, and I'm the managing editor of the Afro-American newspaper. And I'm so happy to be online this morning with some folks who are making a tremendous difference in our city, who are not only helping to make it, but are monitoring what's going on in our city. I am on with Wanda Watts this morning, and I'm on with Ken Thompson and with Seth Rosenthal, and they are all working on the team that is monitoring the Baltimore consent decree. So who wants to go first with an introduction, maybe to yourself and how you got involved in this project?
I think Ken is going to be the one to introduce us all and get us started.
Well, I'll do that. I think everybody knows Wanda Watts, so that probably doesn't really demand much of an introduction. Seth Rosenthal, in addition to being one of the deputies on the team, he's also my law partner, and he and I work very, very close together. I'm the lead monitor. I don't know, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I've lived in Baltimore for 70 plus years, okay? And grew up in West Baltimore. Your question was, why did I decide to get involved? Well, you know, the city's been very good to me. And 4 or 5 years ago, when this process first got started, this was a way for me to give back. You know, I love this city. I think this city has the potential to be one of the greatest in the country. We have our issues like most major cities, in fact, most cities in the country now. But I know that we can do better. And I thought that working with trying to reform this police department, because many, many years ago, before I became a corporate lawyer, I was a defense lawyer. I was a pretty daggone good one back in those days. And, you know, so I've seen both sides of the equation. You know, I've been on the good side, I've been on the bad side. I've represented some high ranking policemen. I've gone after some high ranking policemen. So it was my opportunity to give back. So that's in a quick nutshell why I got involved. Let me ask Seth, because I think Seth is from DC, but he's really a strong advocate for this process. So I'll turn it over to Seth to let you introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you, Ms. Boulware. Yeah, I'm Seth Rosenthal, and I'm a deputy monitor here. I have certain subject matter expertise, so there are certain areas of the consent decree that I monitor. Then there are also a bunch of kind of administrative duties, I guess you could say. So if, you know, Ken is the president and CEO of the team, I'm probably the chief operating officer. And so I keep the trains running on time. But I have a long history in civil rights enforcement and in criminal justice reform. I once worked in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department and prosecuted, among other things, police misconduct, including excessive use of force and false arrest. In private practice, I've done a bunch of civil rights enforcement work, including work monitoring, suing police officers and police departments, and also helping police departments comply with their constitutional obligations. And so this was a natural fit. And when Ken and I together saw the opportunity, we put together a team. There really aren't any other lawyers on the team. The other folks on the team are social scientists, former police chiefs, and community engagement specialists like Wanda. We formed the team, and it was a competitive process. There were about 30 different teams that had applied, and we came out you know, on top, together with another team that we were merged with at the end of the process, a team led by former DC police chief and Philadelphia police chief Chuck Ramsey, who some of you who watch CNN may see from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
So
tell me.
Say a few things.
Sure. Ken, did you want to say something?
No, I asked Wanda if she wanted to do a quick intro herself.
No, one of the things that I admire about the team is the fact that there are subject matter experts from all around the country. They're not just centralized on the East Coast or the West Coast, but they've had a bird's eye view of the country. And I appreciate Seth because of his civil rights background, which is so important to what is happening here in Baltimore because of the unconstitutional policing that has occurred all of my life and probably the life of most of our citizens. And between the two, between Ken and Seth and the rest of the team, Baltimore has an opportunity to change. We have a tremendous opportunity to be the model for the country. And that's my little spiel.
Okay. So this consent, so what is a consent decree and why does Baltimore have one? Just basics.
Let me start. And I think the report that came out last week that I'm certain most, if not everyone, has read. I'm talking about the Gun Trace Task Force report, outlined a lot of bad history about this department. While that's not the only reason why we have the consent decree, a lot of what you see in that Gun Trace Task Force independent report is one of the big reasons why the consent decree came into existence in Baltimore City. And if you will recall, it really came about as a result of the Freddie Gray situation, and then Mayor Rawlings Blake asked the Justice Department to come in to do an investigation. They did what's called a pattern and practice investigation. They spent about a year and they found all kinds of things. Some of them are mentioned in this Gun Trace Task Force situation. In fact, the Gun Trace Task Force report is very, very comprehensive and names a lot more things than the DOJ found. But, in addition to the integrity issues, the DOJ found that people of color in particular were being stopped and searched and arrested unconstitutionally. And I mean, it's just a whole host of issues. So what ended up happening, it was a long process. The city and BPD on one side, the DOJ on the other. This is a lawsuit. It's what it was, just like any other lawsuit. It was filed, but rather than engage in a court action, the parties decided to settle the case, just like you would settle an accident case. They had a judge in this case, Judge Bedard. He was assigned to the case, and after a couple of years of working through the process and actually spending about 6 months with the parties hammering out those things that they thought would reform this police department, they put together this 500 plus paragraph document that outlined all the things that both the city, BPD, and DOJ thought would benefit this department. And when I say benefit this department, actually transform it into a constitutional police department. And once the judge reviewed it and got the buy-in from the city, where the city and BPD agreed to do all the things that were in this document, it was signed by the judge, and that became what's known as the consent decree. It's a court order. This is not a social experiment. This is a court order that mandates, which means it demands that the city and BPD comply, and if they don't, there are consequences. So in a nutshell, that's what the consent decree is.
Does it have an end date? Is there a target date that these things must be fulfilled, or?
Well, no, the way it works, the consent decree will be around until the department, which is the Baltimore Police Department, and the City of Baltimore comply with all of the provisions of the consent decree. Now, nobody wants to be around forever. And quite frankly, and I'll let Seth speak to this in a second, we've been working on this now close to 4 years. We spent a good bit of the first 3 years helping this department revise its policies to put together better training techniques, a better training curriculum. We have worked with the department and DOJ in terms of getting the city to improve its technology infrastructure. We've helped them develop a much better internal affairs section. It's now called the Public Integrity Bureau. But what we think we've done over the last 4 years, we've given the department the tools to at least train their police officers to be constitutional police officers. Now, whether they are able to do that, we will see, because quite frankly, beginning in early 2021, my team and of course the judge, we decided, okay, we've spent a heck of a lot of time helping this department put in place training techniques and other what I would call foundational infrastructure pieces. But now it's time to figure out whether all that time and all that effort is paying off. In other words, that we're going to see the fruits of all this hard work. So, and this is where Seth is really the lead on this. For this year and for the next few years, we will now be doing what is really part of our job, which is to assess, to figure out whether or not, in fact, the training and the policy changes and all the other things that have been done, whether they're bearing the fruit that we expect them to bear. So we will know in about a year or two whether they have complied. Now, I think they've shown some progress. they're on the right path, but they've got a long way to go.
Mhm.
Can I interject? Can someone address the fact that we did not have a computerized system until June of this year? Which I think people really need to understand, that we've had a paper process up until this point.
Seth, I'll let you, because you're good at that. If I start talking about technology, they're going to cut the airways going to cut off. So, so Seth, why don't you tell us a little bit about the importance?
You know, I'm not a whole lot better, but look, you know, there are some things that, you know, we didn't need this technology to begin assessing, to determine whether the department is coming into compliance with the consent decree. But as Ken said, we needed to help them lay the foundation to come into compliance by getting them to put out new policies and by training their officers on those policies. And that part of the process, that foundational part of the process, is largely done. But the problem for us in terms of monitoring compliance with large swaths of the consent decree is that BPD did not have the information technology systems in place that would allow us to look at data on stops, data on weapons pat-downs or frisks, data on searches, and data on arrests in a comprehensive manner so that we could aggregate it, we could slice it and dice it the way we need to determine whether there are good and positive trends or whether there are bad and downward trends in all of these things that the consent decree requires us to assess. It is just now, as Ms. Watts said, that BPD has put in place a brand new record management system, which will allow us to do those kinds of analyses. And what you had before was officers basically writing, you know, paper tickets, paper incident reports, paper probable cause statements to justify arrests with carbon copies, right? I mean, it's like we were back in the 1950s and 60s. And that system was in place, as Wanda said, until just this past summer, right? Now they've got a record management system which allows officers to create their reports electronically. They've got what's called real-time electronic field-based reporting. So if they stop somebody, if they search somebody, if they arrest somebody, they can enter it into the computer that they have with them, either in their car, or not all the cars are yet equipped with computers, or they will be, or on the laptops that are issued by the department, and they can do it in real time out in the field without having to spend 2 or 3 hours at the end of their shifts writing these reports. You know, it's a bumpy process. No massive rollout of a new technology system like this goes as smoothly as anyone would like. But look, it's happening now, and we're beginning to assess whether officers are using it in the way that it's designed to be used.
Mhm.
I think that's major.
Yeah,
That
it
is
is.
major.
Actually, I'll tell you a secret. 100 years ago, I worked at the police department. There was a whole department that did nothing but churn out reports, paper reports 24/7. And I was one of those people that used to file them away once they were done. So it's a mountain of paper.
Well, your
Back in the
successors
days,
continue to be there at least through last summer, and they're still there. So.
Yeah, if you spent $10 back in those days, Dorothy, you could always get an offense report, but it took 2 months to get it. So
Absolutely.
let me say one other.
So many of them.
Let me say one other thing about this technology, and I know you have some other questions, but I think it's important to keep in mind. I mean, obviously, technology helps in a lot of different ways, including, you know, where to deploy officers for crime fighting. But the other thing, from the perspective of those of us on the consent decree that are trying to reform this department, it's actually important to identify some folks who shouldn't be policemen. And so when you have now a computerized system in place where supervisors who are now being trained to do this, you know, when you, and this, there's a platform that's being developed right now, and I'm not going to get myself in trouble by getting too far in the weeds, but they're working with a vendor right now to figure out what's called an early intervention system platform, so that when you see, you know, an officer is engaged in some incidents, some big, some small, but there is a pattern that's developing, you should be able to see that in real time, and it shouldn't be hard to detect. And the importance of that is, if you are a good supervisor, then you should be able to figure out, okay, I need to talk to Officer Jones because he or she, there's some problem here. And if you, some of these officers just need counseling because they don't know that what they're doing is wrong. But some are so bad they shouldn't be in the department. So this early intervention system really is designed, along with a whole host of other tools that Commissioner Harrison has brought in, is designed to identify, hopefully in an early stage, those folks who need some help, and in some cases who need to be separated from the department, so we don't have the kinds of things we saw back in 2014. You know, a black kid, because he wears his pants below his waistline, you know, he's being slammed against the wall in strip search, you know, in the middle of the street naked. I mean, you know, those are the kinds of police officers you don't want. And the early intervention system is designed to deal with that ahead of time, and that's part of technology.
I was going to ask you about that, actually, is my next question. I think I borrowed some of your language from a previous article about needing to burn it to the ground, because that's what it felt like. And yet it sounds like this really does handle it. So the new policies and stuff, are they, the current police officers are being trained as well as the incoming being trained through the academy?
Absolutely. And let me say this about policies. Policies are not stagnant. I mean, you know, these policies that are in place today, we think are good, but there are two things that the consent decree requires. It requires that you look at the old policies that were in place when we first came on board to see if they really met best standards. But the other thing you have to look at is, even when you have the best intentions, sometimes, because none of us are God and none of us are perfect, we may all think that the three of us or the four of us in the room may say, oh, this policy makes a lot of sense. And maybe after 6 months or 2 years, you find out it's not really accomplishing what you want. So the way the consent decree is designed, it requires the department to revisit their policies on an annual basis, those that need to be tweaked and maybe sometimes jettisoned and start from scratch. I mean, that's one of the main things about the consent decree. It requires this police department to do a lot of introspective analysis. They need to look within themselves to figure out whether or not, from an infrastructure standpoint and from a policy perspective, do they have the right policies in place? Do they have the right infrastructure in place? So hopefully that answers your question.
You know, one of the things that I bring up with my community members is the fact that we need their involvement, because the police department can put together policy and procedure that works for them, but how does it work in the community? And so we need both partners. And so that's one of the reasons we're here, Dorothy, because we need the community support.
Absolutely. And so the first step is to let the community know what's going on.
Yes.
And then, of course, the question is then how can the community get involved? But let me ask you one thing before we do that. Let's go back to this policy process, the introspection. Is there somebody from the monitoring team that participates in that? Or is that all done by the department and just then reported back to the monitoring team?
No, it's a collaborative effort. It's the Department of Justice, it's the monitoring team, it's BPD, and it's also, as Wanda mentioned, it's also the community. When you look back at the consent decree and you look at, and Seth, you know, is really the primary writer of these, what we call these monitoring plans, which every year we have to show the court, this is what we expect to achieve in year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. You will see that with respect to every single policy, and in fact, in every single training curriculum, the community is given 2 opportunities to review and to respond and to give their comments. And I can tell you, and I hope Seth will back me up on this, you know, and with respect to many of these policies and many of these training curricula, we have gotten a tremendous amount of help from the community, because as Wanda said, you know, looking at it from a policeman's standpoint, they see their side, which of course is law enforcement, but they sometimes miss the fact, not because they're mean people or bad people, it's just that that's not what they're thinking about. But you have someone in the community who's lived that experience. They can say, look, Commissioner Harrison, yeah, I understand why you want to clear these corners, but you know what? A lot of these are good kids and they're not doing anything bad. They don't have a park or a rich, you know, swimming pool to hang around. The only place they can hang around is that convenience store, because it's warm and it's well lit and they can talk. Well, you know, your police officer shouldn't just be coming down the street and slamming the brakes and trying to catch these, you know, you need to treat them like they're human. Well, those things have been incorporated in these policies. And as Seth may want to explain in a few minutes, that's one of the reasons why part of the community policing plan requires police to be trained on what's called, in terms of lesser offenses, they're trained to use what we call the least intrusive means to solve that problem.
Mhm.
And that a lot of that came from the community.
Seth, you on?
Ken's covering everything.
No,
Yeah, we all have those questions and those sensibilities. I mean, I grew up in East Baltimore, so I know how it can be when we work together. Wanda, what can we do? What do you want the residents to know and to do to make this work better?
Well, let me say this. We had a Facebook live forum last night. So we need a quarterly forum. So we need people to forums. We thought, well, let's say this, before COVID, we were having, community association meetings in person. Now we have to rely on, social media and all the other electronic means of getting together. But when the policies and procedures are being revised, the community is given at least 2 opportunities to give their input. So we need people to look at make sure that we have their email addresses so that we can send out the information to them. We have neighborhood liaisons in each district. So they need to learn who their neighborhood liaisons are. And we need the community to stay engaged. They need to learn every piece of the consent decree, because this, when this is over and the judge says, okay, then we're going to be stuck with this.
Whatever it is.
It'll be too late to say, oh, I didn't know.
Mhm.
Can I have an opportunity? No, it's going to be too late. Now is the time that we need people to be engaged.
and can I add that
Let me just add to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Seth.
Yeah. So every time a draft policy is issued by BPD in collaboration with the monitoring team and the Justice Department, and every time a draft training program or draft training curricula is drafted by BPD in collaboration with us, BPD posts it to the transparency page on its website and solicits and takes in feedback from community members. So that is one way for community members to play an active role in the shaping of policy and the shaping of how officers are trained. We will, on our social media platforms, disseminate links to those draft policies and those draft training curricula so that folks can, go from our social media platforms directly to BPD, which is where really their comments ought to be directed. We are happy to receive community comments and pass them along to BPD and discuss them together with BPD and the community. But look, we are not going to be here forever. This consent decree process is going to end at some point in the next few years. And when it does, both BPD as an institution and the community need to develop the muscle memory required to deal with each other on a consistent basis so that the community continues to have a stake in what's happening inside the department and continues to exercise its influence over what's happening inside the department. And that's part of what this policy revision and training formation process is about, is to make sure that that particular framework is established, where BPD and the community will interact with one another so that the community recognizes that it has a stake in what BPD is doing, and BPD understands that it is there to protect and serve folks in the community.
Mhm.
Thank you, Seth. You couldn't have said it better.
No, I know. Ken, you said you wanted to say something?
No, I wanted Seth to do just what he just
did. You did a great job. I know we all have time constraints and we pretty much run out. I hope that in the near future, when the time is right, we'll come back together again and give some updates and let people know what's what. I'm sure Wanda will keep me abreast